Welcome to the Caregiver Reality Show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of Caregiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. This is the Caregiver Reality Hour, and I'm your host, David Levy. I'm here with my co-host, Paul.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
You know, earlier today I was doing a support group over at Arden Court, who's one of our sponsors, and let me tell you, the place was packed. I'm not talking about just the facility, but the caregiver support group. And it wasn't even those that are the regulars who have a loved one already in. That's done on Fridays. But it was just a Tuesday. And, caregiving is everywhere, folks. And if it hasn't visited you yet, I hope it doesn't, but invariably it will. And, one of the things people ask when they look at our logo, E equals MC squared. And they take a look and go, Einstein. But really, education makes a competent caregiver. And what we try and do with this show, with our books, with our teaching programs, etc., we try and create confident caregivers using our tools for successful caregiving. And they are wide and varied, and invariably, we will have something that fits what you need for the caregiving problem that you're dealing with. And so I invite you not only to listen to the show, but also to make sure you go to the caregiverreality.com website. And every week we're adding more and more things, and we're adding more diversity to it. And tonight we have a special call-in guest. If you've never listened to a great bioethicist, we have one coming on. It'll be about 5:30. And so, Paul, in the words that we use every week, how was your week in caregiving?
Well, before I get into my week in caregiving, I want to shout out to my lovely wife, and we have our 9th wedding anniversary coming up on the 16th.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. And my week in caregiving, I guess this was a yo-yo.
Yo-yo.
A yo-yo.
Okay.
I mean literally, this morning when Debbie got up this morning, she was a little sore from physical therapy yesterday. They gave her a good workout, and I went out to meet with a client today, and then when time I got back, it was like she crashed, like the sky fell from the
sky's falling, Chicken Little.
Those two. And she just turned that quickly, and the lupus rash was there, and old friends visiting again. So you get spoiled when you have the good days.
Oh yes.
And you become and you treasure them, and but you know that it's just lurking around the corner, and you just can't become complacent. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
That's absolutely right. And when I was doing the support group, I hear a very classic line all the time. People come into a facility, people go to a senior center, and invariably the first remark is, mine is too high functioning to be here. Folks, if you're looking at a facility, if you're putting your loved one into going to a senior center who isn't there just to be able to play, checkers or around a bridge, then you really have to question how you assess high functioning. Until you are around people, and I'll just use dementia for a while, you don't know what the word high functioning means relative to the disease, because all you see is your person, the one you're taking care of. And unless you're around many, the ability to distinguish yours from others and to say, this, my loved one is high functioning, it's because you remember and you're clinging to bits of who they were, what they were, and giving them, and that's good, the benefit of the doubt in a lot of things. But you have to be very careful that you don't overshoot the mark and assume that they can do more than they can, that they can be trusted more than they can to be alone, even though we don't want them alone, that they can go out and take that walk and that they'll be safe and return, that you can take them and leave them off at the mall or in the store, because that's when you really find out that they have forgotten and they're not as high functioning as you thought they were. And you have to be very careful because you're the person in charge. And if you're in charge, it's a greater responsibility even than being a wife for a husband or a husband for a wife. Once you have the responsibility of becoming a caregiver for another who can no longer take care of themselves the way they used to be able and now need the assistance of you or others, then that responsibility vests with you, and you can't ignore it. And you can't just glibly say, mine's too high functioning to be here. Paul?
I think that's across the spectrum. Sometimes we over-assess, or we put our own beliefs into it. When it's a loved one, it's just hard sometimes to face the truth. Just recently, Debbie was told by two of her doctors she needs to walk now with a cane because her balance is off. And it was like a huge change in her life. And we would go for a walk. Well, do I really need to have the cane? You're going to be with me. And the husband part of me wants to say, we'll be okay. But the caregiver in me says, do we really want to take the risk of a fall, maybe a broken hip, a broken bone? What's the prudent thing that we should do?
And remember, we're dealing, besides with practicality, respectfully, we're dealing with vanity. Nobody says, boy, I can't wait until I have to use a walker. I can't wait until the day I have a cane, or that I'm on a jazzy scooter zipping around the aisles. It's a consequence of illness, aging, frailty, and a lot of other things, but our vanity gets in the way. It's no different. I have neglected now for the last year, and I'm being honest, going in and having to have my hearing assessed because I know it's very close to time for hearing aids. And my vanity is bumping into my practicality, but I know that if I wait too long, my brain will no longer compute what it's hearing the way it used to do it, and that I'll stop listening the way I should. And so my somewhat promise to myself before the end of the year, and I'm asking you to enforce it as my partner.
I'll tell you what, David.
Yeah.
When the word mumble creeps into your vocabulary,
right,
you're way past time.
I know, and you mumble all the time. No, but I'm terrible if there's background noise. I know it's time. And so even those of us that know, vanity still gets in the way, but I don't have a choice in the matter. I want to be able to keep on listening because any of you, I don't know, but last night was a great last show on Blacklist. I won't discuss it any further, Paul, because I know you taped it and you didn't see it. All right. What do you got for us tonight?
What do I have for us tonight? Well, we have a guest coming on later on tonight, which I'm very excited about. She was introduced to me by a colleague who is the founder of what is called Purposeful Planning Institute. Her name is Vicki Kind, and she is a bioethicist. And as we get closer to the time, I'll give a little bit more of an introduction, because the area that she works with, both with individual clients, but more importantly with physicians, hospitals, and other professionals, really help solve some of the dilemmas that are not so clear and not so easily identified.
Yep. And last week we started to make the caregiver cake. Yes. And Paul had decided he would start with resentment, and I said the resentment was a substitute for a stick of butter and a cake. And I said, without Without butter in a cake, you're not making a great cake. So I decided that I would name the cake. And it's called the Caregiver Upside Down Cake. And tonight we're going to talk about the substitute for flour, because how do you make a good cake without flour? I mean, yes, there are some vegans out there who will tell us that we can make it with string beans and an artichoke, and I'm not picking on them, but I mean, a good old-fashioned...
Gotta have gold medal flour.
Right. So what are we substituting for flour tonight? Guilt. There is nothing more pervasive in caregiving than guilt. Those of us that grew up with Catholic guilt, Jewish guilt, whatever form of ethnic, religious guilt, we all had it. All right? This is a whole different kind of guilt. This is the guilt of not a question of whether or not, you pleased your mother, or whether you got home on time to eat, Toddy, eat. But this is the kind of guilt that comes with wondering and caring and trying to decide whether what you're doing is the right thing, whether it's good enough, whether you've hit the mark, whether or not you should do things like place a loved one in daycare, whether you should make the decision to put them in assisted living. There is nothing more treacherous than guilt. And one of the things that caregivers don't understand, because even if you watched others do caregiving, you don't always understand the emotions that they're going through, even if you watch them go through the motions. And guilt is always there as we question how capable we are. And sometimes when people really get upset, and I'll say to them, just getting through the day for you and Mom is a great day. There's nothing to be guilty about. Caregiving is complex, confusing, complicated, and it's also counterintuitive. It goes against everything that we assume and thought about. And as a result, we question our capabilities. Now, I will tell you that there's nothing that's necessarily very intuitive about caregiving. As I've repeated on many an occasion, that we don't have a caregiving gene. We have a nurturing gene that comes out when we have kids, and and mommy and daddy are doing a good job. But when all of a sudden it's spousal caregiving, nothing comes out of the woodwork that says, I know how to go from being a good caregiver, from being a good husband, to being a husband who's a caregiver. And what do I do? How do I do it? And most men, and since we are they and we're caregivers, look to solve the problem by using their learned skills. But keeping your wife
logic goes
safe
out the window
is not the same as going and getting an oil change. All right, it's not the things that we're used to doing. So when I say that we try and create confident caregivers, we can't create miracles. So I mean, using words like heroic and fearless and etc. I don't think anybody gets to that level. But what you really want to have when you're a caregiver is confidence. Confidence that you understand what's going on. Confident that you have some knowledge of what you're responsible for or where to turn to get it. And that's why this program and the things that we do, I said it at the opening, are designed to create successful caregiving. And success is any way you want to define it. If it was learning how to become a better advocate when you took them to the doctor and you asked, how come we're still on all of these meds? Why do we need them? All right? Or whether or not you had to go and deal with the VA, Social Security, and it's not something that we do every day, but you learn the questions to ask and where to take the problem and who to deal with. That's success. All right? It may not seem it at the time, but this is what a caregiver who understands, who is confident, is not afraid to take the bull by the horns and say, look, I've done my homework and I will not stand for this. You cannot push me around and push my loved one around just because you think this is the way it ought to be done, because that's the way the system works. So as we go forward week after week, and as we're making this caregiver upside down cake, we'll be substituting out ingredients for, just as we did resentment, we're dealing with guilt. We could spend the entire show on guilt, but I don't think that that's really what the mission of this show is, to just take a subject and ramble on through it for the entire hour. But I will tell you that as an essential ingredient in the caregiver cake that went upside down, flour we need, and guilt is that substitute that we don't want.
And oftentimes we're our own worst enemy. We set that bar so high. We're so afraid that others will judge us as not doing the quality or the amount of caregiving, or the way that we're doing it is not right.
Or even just challenging us from afar.
Yeah.
The relatives that say, oh, Dad's not that bad. Or the daughter that says to Mom, what are you doing? How come you're doing it this way? I just went on the internet and read this, that, and the other thing, and they say you're wrong. Well, I say, who said the internet's right? The internet, last week, you and I both checked, and the words reality and caregiving, or caregiver reality, not even .com, we came up first, second, third, and fifth in Google out of 4,300,000 citations that use that combination of words. So everybody's out there. I'm not saying we're the best. However, Google and usage, etc., at least said that when you went to caregiver reality, or the reality of caregiving, we came up at the top. I mean, there were 3 paid ads above us, and we can't do anything about that. But and I went back, because I checked it on last Tuesday, and I went back last night, and we were still 1, 2, 3, and 5 out of 3,950,000. And so I'm pleased, but it also makes me recognize, and you do too, Paul, that the internet is flooded with information. Good, bad, stale, current, sound bites, assumptions, and that just because it's said on the internet doesn't always make it so. And you really have to question. You've seen, and I'm not just speaking to you, but I'm talking to the audience, we have seen so many things that have turned around, whether it's medical advice that we've seen on television that 6 months later they're reversing, questions that we ask and all of a sudden the answers have changed. So we have to be good shoppers for information, and that's part of being a confident, competent caregiver. And along the way you learn what to weed out, and we will show you. And if you have a plan, then you understand how to approach caregiving, because it's not something that we're used to doing. And as you so very accurately said, caregiving and the complications that come with it are the gift that never stops giving.
Oh, it is, David. And you were talking about the internet, and it does a lot of good, and you get a lot of information from the internet. What you don't want to confuse is knowledge with information.
Well said.
And even more importantly than that, you don't want to assume that even if it is knowledge, there's wisdom that is tied to it. Because wisdom is a factor of who you are, the credentials, the experience, the what you know, and what you've actually have lived. So we have to be very careful where we source our information. Just the fact that it's out there doesn't necessarily make it true. And we live in a world of sound bites.
Right. We certainly do. Before Vicki comes on, because I don't know how long it's going to be, I want to do 2 things. Number 1, I want to give our weekly shout out to medical research charities who we've become the de facto caregiver organization, even though many of their underlying charities that do research in a variety of healthcare disciplines have some of their own caregiving. We've approached them with the idea of making available our non-clinical version. And MRC, or Medical Research Charities, at medicalresearchcharities.org have been very, very cooperative. A matter of fact, right now we're in the middle of, as you know, Paul, of collaborating to create a commercial for them that we'll be able to run on the show. But each week I'm picking one of their underlying research charities, and this one was close to my heart more than euphemistically, and this is the Prostate Cancer Foundation. And they're the world's leading philanthropic organization funding and accelerating research on prostate cancer. Since its founding in 1993, it has raised over $500 million and provided funding to more than 1,600 research projects at nearly 200 institutions in 15 countries. That's an astounding amount of work when you stop to think it's only been 20 years, and that as one small organization, they have been able to raise and disperse $500 million.
Some accomplishment.
Right. And their efforts have helped produce a 20-fold increase in government funding, because it's most important that the government get behind these efforts. And if, for a long time, if you weren't cancer, heart, lung disease, you weren't at the top of that list at the National Institute of Health for funding. These folks have brought very prominently, and in an aging society, we see a lot more issues concerning prostate than we've ever seen before. And having been a sufferer of prostate cancer, I can speak to it directly. Anyway, many of the important research discoveries made in the past 19 years were a direct result of the Prostate Cancer Research Foundation, funding or coordinating, including the development of new meds, gene therapy approaches, and the development of vaccines, and this is fascinating, that signal the body to use your own immune system to attack the prostate cancer. And we're seeing that more and more, utilizing your own immune system when it comes to cancer. Not just in prostate cancer, but in a variety of others. And being able to harness our own immune system to attack from within without necessarily needing to go through all of the radiation and chemotherapy is a very exciting horizon for a lot of different diseases. And I give a lot of credit to the Prostate Cancer Research Foundation for the work they've done, the visibility that they've raised. And if you want to see more, you can go to the You go to medicalresearchcharities.org, and you can click on Prostate Cancer Foundation, or you can go to them directly at www.pcf.org. And very worthwhile. These research organizations are the forefront of how we're able to attack the various diseases that afflict us and others.
And the fundraising that MRC does is just absolutely incredible, and it's one of those organizations that really make a difference in the world for all of the medical research charities they support.
And I want to say, if you're listening to us, we're at WWNN 1470 AM. You can hear us on iHeartRadio, CareGiverReality.com. Freddie told me that we're also on the WNN website tonight, and that obviously you can call us at 1-888-565-1470, but we do have Vicki Kind, the bioethicist, coming up. And I do want to remind folks that this Saturday at Regents Park Nursing Home, which is at the corner of Verde Trail and North Verde Trail, right down from the Verde Elementary School, is going to be a very excellent health fair and education program going on from 10 to 2. I'll be there with my book. I'll be doing book signing. I'm going to help Freddie out along with you, Paul. We're going to be doing a little hosting and introducing people. And I will tell you, folks, there's a lot of health fairs that go on in a lot of places. This is not your run-of-the-mill health fair. This promises to be a very significant event. There's valet parking. There's plenty of places. So come on out, see us. We'll be taping. Get your face on the tube, and we'll go from there.
For our listeners in Alaska, it's actually in Boca Raton, Florida, and what better excuse to come for a visit than to join us for the health fair. Please don't miss it.
Absolutely. Get those Huskies rigged up and get that sled down here. Anyway, we're going to go to a break now, and when we come back, until we get Vicki on the line, Paul, it'll go back to you. Anyway, you're listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour, and we're going to take a break.
CFC support helps fund research. You can too. Each year, thousands of men and women serving their country in the U.S. military, as well as other employees of the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service, provide support for medical research to find treatments and cures for diseases. This is done through the Combined Federal Campaign, an annual workplace giving campaign that allows eligible individuals to support charities, such as those that conduct medical research, through a payroll deduction. Money donated this way to the medical research charities and its member organizations helps fund research to fight diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, blindness, breathing disorders, and much more. The diseases included afflict people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. You don't need to be a member of the military or a federal government employee to support research to help you or those you love that are suffering from an illness or disease. Donations to our not-for-profit tax-exempt organizations are tax-deductible and provide a vital source of funding in the fight to defeat some of life's most dreaded diseases. Please visit the website of the Medical Research Charities, which can be found at medicalresearchcharities.org. That's all one word, medicalresearchcharities.org. On that website, you can learn more about our member charities and make a donation in support of the research they're conducting for a specific disease or family of diseases. You can make a donation to Medical Research Charities itself and support the work of all our member charities. Please visit our website today, medicalresearchcharities.org. Become a part of Joining Forces to Find a Cure. Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
Well, we're back, and I hope all of you are listening because I heard the phone ring even without hearing aids. And so I believe that means that Vicki Kind is on the air, and I know, Paul, you've been speaking with her. You have a bunch of questions you want to ask. I'm going to sit back and see just how good a co-host you are.
Well, I want you to listen closely.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. Don't mumble.
Okay.
In any event, let's hear from Vicki. Vicki, are you on?
Hi there. Hi, guys.
Hi, guy. Hi, guys. Hi, guy. Paul's going to take it over from here.
Well, but you're both there.
Good evening, Vicki. Vicki, if you will, let me give our audience a little bit of your background. Vicki is a clinical bioethicist, a medical educator, and a hospice volunteer. She wrote an award-winning book, The Caregiver's Path to Compassionate Decision-Making, Making Choices for Those Who Can't, guides families and professionals through the difficult process of making decisions for those who have lost capacity. Vicki is an honorary board member of the Well Spouses Association and has been a caregiver herself for many years for 4 members of her family. Vicki, I'm so pleased that you joined us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Vicki, we said bioethicist before, which is a lot of words. Can you just briefly define for us what a bioethicist is and the kind of work that you do, please?
Yeah, I'm a clinical bioethicist, so that means I protect people in hospitals. I get called in when the situation is an absolute mess. The doctors and the family and everyone's fighting, and they need someone to help sort it out. So I'll go in there and mediate and facilitate the conflicts and help people figure out what's the right thing to do.
Okay. Vicki, I so enjoyed reading your book, and for such a complicated topic, the book is so readable, and it's available through a multiplicity of places, and we'll talk a little bit at the end. Vicki, can you talk a little bit about the book and what really differentiates your book to the many others that are out there?
Oh, thank you. Well, the first is it's written by a bioethicist. So I have all these amazing tools that most people don't know about. When I go and speak at Alzheimer's conferences, the professionals will come up to me and say, "We've never heard of any of this. Where did you get this?" And it's like, well, this is what I've been trained to use. And so basically my book focuses on how to make good decisions for people with varying degrees of mental capacity, whether someone has a little Alzheimer's or a lot of Alzheimer's or a brain injury or a developmental disability. In any of those situations, families or guardians have to be stepping in to make their decisions. One of the main things about my book that people really appreciate is that it's a process book. It helps family caregivers take action by walking them through a decision-making process. I give them the right questions to ask and tools that they can use to help evaluate the different choices. The reason I wrote this is because when I was 21 and taking care of my mom after her stroke, I had no idea how to be a good advocate for her. But when I started taking care of my dad years later, I started using my bioethics tools, because at that point in my life, I was a professional in this area, and they worked so beautifully. And I'm like, I can explain these and give these to other caregivers, because it's really difficult to be a caregiver, and there's so much pressure. Everyone's saying, well, what do you want to do? And how do we know what's the right thing to do?
Oh, such an important question. How do we know the right thing to do? One of the things that was so well laid out in the book were the tools that are used in decision making that actually make it a compassionate process. Can you speak a little bit about those tools, Vicki?
Absolutely. The first tool is called the decision-making framework. And this tool helps us to make sure that we're respecting the person's wishes when we know them and doing right by them as if they could speak for themselves. And it also gives us guidelines for when we don't know what the person would want and we need to make the best decision we can. The second tool is the one that caregivers really love because it's called the shared decision-making model. It helps us figure out how much the patient or that person should be included in the decision-making process, and we do that thinking about the patient's mental age. Now, my dad had vascular dementia, and sometimes he was mentally 5 years old, sometimes he was mentally 12 years old. And this is when I really knew that these tools could help others, because when he was mentally 5, I had to be in charge. I had to make all the big decisions, because you don't let a 5-year-old make big decisions. They can choose where to go for lunch, but you're not going to let them make financial or important decisions. But when he was mentally 12, I had to figure out, can he be included in some of these choices? Can he have a voice? because it's wonderful if we can still let that person who has a disability still be to be included in their life. So that's the second tool, and it always works together with the third tool. The third tool is called the sliding scale for decision making. Now, this tool tells us that we have to look at the specific situation and how our person is actually doing that day, where their mental age is, to figure out how much danger is in this situation, and would it be safe for this person to have a voice. So the sliding scale tells us that if it's a more serious situation, like driving, like paying bills, like remembering to take medicines, because that can be very dangerous to people who are taking their medicines the wrong way, you better have a lot of mental capacity or a very high mental age. We don't expect an 8-year-old to take their medicines correctly. We have to step in. If it's an easy decision that doesn't have a lot of consequences, then somebody with a lower mental age can participate. So let me give you a quick example of when I watched this work, and it was great, because it was great to help a caregiver. I was working with this young man, and he was the caregiver for his grandfather. And the two of us had figured out that his grandfather had a mental age of 8 years old. And as he's talking about this, his face lit up. He's like, I got it. My grandfather is 8 years old. 8-year-olds don't drive. I should take away the keys.
Wow, great.
Oh, it was so great, because his gut has been saying that. For months he's known he should take away the car keys, but he wasn't sure. He didn't have something to validate those feelings. And these tools and this framework help him know, I must take away the tools, because 8-year-olds can't drive. So that was just such a great moment. The last tool, the Ascent tool, basically shows us how to include the person if we think they can have a voice in the decision, because we want to enable and empower that person, but there's a certain way you should do it, and the Ascent tool teaches us that, because we want that person not to be invisible in their own life.
Vicki,
So,
this is
tools.
David. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I must tell you, in 26 years of not only being a mediator and a gerontologist and all of the involvement that I have with family caregivers, we always talk about capacity and competence, and it's kind of like a thing. But when you opened my eyes when I read the book as well, to injecting into it the emotional, intellectual age capability of the person who we are dealing with, be it the patient, whatever, it opened up a whole different horizon for me, because just as the young man that was dealing with his grandfather had that aha moment when you said, Grandpa has the same thinking power that an 8-year-old does, and 8-year-olds don't drive, really drives home a message that's very different than saying, well, he doesn't have the capacity to drive anymore. And so I want to thank you. That I don't, just in introducing me to looking at intellectual age really made a very big difference, and I've started to utilize that in explaining to caregivers kind of a different look at who they're dealing with, and it makes it a little easier to explain things.
And right before you came on, Vicki, we were discussing guilt of caregivers. What a wonderful way to take guilt out of the equation is when we have a yardstick to measure the actions that we're taking. It's a wonderful tool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, these two tools working together, they take care of a lot of the guilt, because it's still hard to take away the keys. It's still hard to move someone to a care community. These are still hard decisions, but at least you have that peace of mind and peace of heart. I am doing the right thing. And the other thing that it does for a lot of people, and why a lot of professionals use these tools now, is because it breaks through the denial. When you understand, oh, he is 12, he is 3, oh, I now need to change my behavior.
Yes.
Yep.
And since denial is almost the first thing that we go to, along with anger, guilt, and resentment, this is a wonderful tool for kind of presenting the argument about their capabilities in a perspective by relating it to something that we can all understand, a 4-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old. And so I think you've done everybody a great service when you put that out in your book. It's one of the more interesting and not only informative but really useful books that I've seen on caregiving.
Very pragmatic.
Yeah.
David, I know you had a
I'm
question.
very practical.
Right. Vicki, I just from a bioethical perspective, I realize it's not crises, but I was doing a support group last week, and we got into the age-old question of emotional divorce. When is it time to say to the caregiver that your life is so empty because of the condition of your loved one that there's nothing wrong with seeking some companionship? I wasn't couching it in terms of just sex. I mean, anybody, but to be able to have somebody to go to the movies with, share a pizza with. I just wonder, from your perspective, how do you look at things like emotional divorce when things like that arise, or you're asked about it?
Yeah, it's always laden with all sorts of ethical dilemmas, because when you start talking about companionship, people assume that will lead to an intimate relationship. And for a lot of caregivers, that's not what they need. They just need someone to talk to. And I think any way that we can support a caregiver to get some support, to reach out, to have some companionship, I think that's a good thing, because caregivers are drowning. They're just so overwhelmed. So I think on a practical level, it's a good idea, because, after you've been a caregiver for 10 years and you need something, and you're still there. I'm so amazed at the spousal or partner caregivers who never give up. They're still there, but their life is empty, as you said.
It gets pretty lonely out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that before you take it to the intimate level, the sexual level, as an ethicist, my firm answer is it's wrong to break promises. It's wrong to not, follow your vows if that was the vow you made to each other. But I don't think people understand the situation, and it's funny for me to have an ethical opinion that's not very stable.
Right.
Swing both ways. And someone else brought this up the other day, and I've been pondering it, because, wow, if I'm not sure, this is a really complicated situation.
Well, the way I kind of put it in the context of dementia is that for better or worse, in sickness and health, but there never was a dementia clause, a but if.
Yeah.
And I don't think if your loved one could return and see how difficult the struggle is, not only to take care of them, but how lonely you've become because it's such a hollow, aspect of your life. And I agree with you. We don't have to jump into the intimacy aspect, but I think we have to recognize in situations where the intellectual capacity and the ability to be an effective companion is no longer there, is something that more and more we're going to have to deal with going forward. And if it perplexes you, you can imagine how the rest of us view it.
Yeah, I think that, there's a lot of pressure from people thinking they know the right answer. But I think that there'll be a second victim if we don't let people have some space for themselves. Because caregivers die before care receivers. So this this is not a little topic. I think that's why, I take it so seriously, this conversation, because this is not people becoming just, I just want to do this. I'm trying to save myself. And I remember when my mom had her stroke and I was her primary caregiver, there was a point where I had to turn to one of my brothers and say, I can't do this. I will die if I keep going like this. I knew it. I knew what this was costing me. And so, I took a break and they stepped in, but, I've been in that moment. So I think we have to support caregivers, and let them. I think this happens actually more than people realize. A lot of caregivers actually become good, close friends with other caregivers.
Well, I think that's
they
why
understand each other.
I agree with you, Vicki. I see in the support groups that I do that they really cohese as family, that they support one another. And it's not your typical, Rogerian kind of support group where, you don't talk outside of the group, you don't even mingle in the parking lot kind of things. These people truly need the support of a peer in the knowledge of what they went through or are going through in caregiving, so that you can have that conversation without having a lot of other background noise and clutter, and where you call up a friend who's not doing it and they don't want to hear one more story about your caregiving. And I think caregivers do need caregivers.
David?
Yeah.
Can we, Vicki, can you take a moment, please, and tell our listeners, first and foremost, how they might be able to get a copy of your book, your website, and if they have something specific, a question, how they may get in touch with you. And we will have it available on our website as well.
Great, thank you. My book is available through bookstores and online, whether it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, independent bookstores. You can find it. It's also in a lot of libraries across the United States. So if you can't afford it, go to the library. That's just as wonderful. And my website is kindethics.com. And ethics is ETHICS.com. And people can communicate directly through that to me, and I always respond to emails. So feel free to contact me.
Vicki, I want to thank you. This has been a great call. I also, Paul and I were discussing, depending on your schedule, that, this has really created a bunch of food for thought. And whether it's next week or the following week, we'd like to bring you back in, because I know we're going to get questions that people have that they may not go and direct to you specifically. But I think that the wisdom that you bring, your book on the caregiver's path, compassionate decision making, is so very, very important. And I'd like to be able to continue this conversation with you again in the not too distant future.
Oh, that would be wonderful. The more people I can help, the better, because I wish someone had reached out and helped me.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Vicki, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to having you on again. Have a great evening, and
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was Vicki Kind. She's a bioethicist, and when I asked the question about emotional divorce and how one ought to approach it, as I said before, if it's confusing and complex for her to try and figure out, and she's got the education and the background for it, you can imagine how difficult it is for the rest of us.
Yeah, when you're in the trenches, it really is difficult, and you have all of these feelings going on simultaneously inside of you. And earlier we spoke about guilt and all of the other ingredients in that cake. It really becomes very, very difficult.
Yes, it is. I just wanted to make mention, because our producer Freddie is now starting to produce demographics and information about who our listening audience is. And this past week, we exceeded 50% in our listening audience being women between the ages of 54 to 65. And right behind that were women 44 to 55, and then came men in the 44 to 55 category. So between men and women 44 to 65, you're making up probably 85% of our audience. And when we moved to drive time, we expected to see a change in the demographic. We expected to see a change across the country, even though we're not talking to everybody in drive time while they're in their car. But all of the research that's being done and the sweet spot, and that's not to neglect anyone, because there are just as many young families dealing with special needs kids, autism, birth defects, whatever it may be. But we're hitting a very interesting beginning edge of Generation X, and really the bulk of the boomers who are really beginning to feel the brunt of caregiving. Either they're in it now, they see it coming, or they're doing it again. And each and every time you encounter caregiving, it's always a different set of dynamics, whether it's financial, geography, family relations, conflict, ethnicity, culture, you name it. It's as diverse as people and as unique as a fingerprint. And for Paul, I did want to mention, as you know, Brenda Bryant, who is the woman who really helps the two of us, is our third compadre, and she has been working very, very diligently on taking a lot of our tools and crafting it for what is called the LGBT community, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. They, just like other unique cultural and because they have domestic partnerships, they have significant others, they view their roles, and in many states, when they can be married, they view themselves as husband and wife with all of the entitlement. But they too have been a neglected group in caregiving. Yes. Only because it's hard to assemble a group that had difficulty identifying themselves and showing up and saying, well, my spouse is another woman, or my spouse is another man. And so I'm really pleased with what she's doing. And in order to promote it the proper way, and we'll be giving you more information, I don't know how many of you know what crowdfunding is, but it's going to the internet with a cause and raising money. And so the funds that we need to really kick this off the right way are being done with an organization called CrowdRise. And it will be up in another couple of days, and it allows people to support efforts like that with a donation of $50 or $100. But you'd be surprised what 1,000 people giving $25 amounts to, in being able to put a program. And it's uniquely designed for the LGBT community, and she has been working with folks of both genders inside of that community to get greater insight. Every Sunday she has a group that comes to her house that she's training, also to be facilitators, but also happen to be in that category. So we don't take any of the presumptions from heterosexual support groups and just automatically paint another cultural and category of folks with the same brush. And so I'm very pleased with what she's doing, and we'll be keeping you apprised of when it will start. We're going to start it down here in South Florida in Broward County, and if it's successful and it grows, we'll be offering the program through the website around the country to other organizations and groups made up of LGBT folks that want to have support groups related to care of their loved one.
And always feel free, if you have questions, go on to the website. If you would have a topic that you would like to see discussed on air, and it applies to a majority of the people, we're more than happy to bring that on here. And we recognize that our audience is a worldwide audience, both rural, urban, and everywhere in between. So we try to broaden what we do to be as inclusive as we can in helping caregivers in their day-to-day struggles.
Right, and that age bracket that we talked about is almost equal, men and women, so that the boomers, regardless of gender, are listening because they see what's happening to them, they're concerned, and we don't pull any punches. We just tell it like it is. Both of Paul and I are caregivers. We've been involved in caregiving for an extended period of time, professionally and personally. So when we tell you something, it comes from the heart, and it comes from the knowledge of having been there. Just as Vicki just mentioned that when she was taking care of her mother, when she was only 21, I was 28 when I was taking care of my mother, who had inoperable lung cancer way back when. And that was really my first experience with caregiving, and it's probably one of the things that pointed me in the direction of where I am today.
Sure.
Learned a lot, and that really made me aware of you can't always follow what other people said. You said it last week, Paul. You got to be a good advocate. You got to take a step back before you take the plunge, not into caregiving, but into making, just as Vicki was talking about, a substituted decision for another, and decide whether it's truly in their best interest.
And their wishes.
And their wishes. If you don't know their wishes, and back then, I'm going back, almost 40 years, when it came to my mother, and if I'd known then what I know now about radiation, I never would have put her through it. But we're starting to grind down to the end of the show. I do want to give a shout out to a good friend of ours. I think we're having dinner on Thursday with Scott Solkoff,
Yes.
one of the leading elder law attorneys in the state, and we'll be having him on very soon to get his understanding of a number of things that he's been working on both at the state and the local level. He's a wonderful attorney. He's in Delray, and if you have need for an elder law attorney, he is certainly one to go to. And if you do want to speak to him, that number's 561-733-4242. 733-4242, area code 561. We only have a few minutes, so not even a few minutes. We got less than that, I see from the control booth. So South Florida, America, and the world, have a great evening. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next Tuesday. Paul?
Caregivers, take care of yourself this week. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday evening.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.